Good evening. Welcome to This Week in Turkey. Relations between Turkey and the U.S. are more strained than ever before following a visa crisis that erupted last Sunday.
The U.S. Embassy in Ankara announced on Sunday, October 8th, that it had suspended all non-immigrant visa services at its diplomatic facilities in Turkey. Recent events have forced the United States government to reassess the commitment of the government of Turkey to the security of U.S. mission facilities and personnel. In order to minimize the number of visitors to our embassy and consulates while these assessments proceed, effective immediately, we have suspended all non-immigrant visa services at all U.S. diplomatic facilities in Turkey, the embassy said in a statement issued on its Twitter account. The move comes at a moment when relations between the two allies are going through severe turbulence following the arrest of Istanbul consulate staff member Metin Topuz late on October 4th over espionage charges and alleged links with some leading members of the Gülen network accused of being behind last year's failed coup attempt. The embassy had previously slammed the arrest in a statement on October 5th, saying that Washington is deeply disturbed by the arrest. On Sunday evening, Turkish embassy in Washington also said that it suspended all non-immigrant visa services at all Turkish diplomatic facilities with two almost word-for-word copies of the US statement in both English and Turkish. While the Turkey-US rift was heating up with the visa crisis, later on Monday, Turkish authorities reportedly issued a detention warrant to testify as a suspect for a second US consulate worker who was allegedly hiding at the consulate compound. On Monday, the US ambassador to Ankara, John Bass, released a statement concerning the ongoing visa crisis, stating that the US has been unable to determine why its staff member arrested or what evidence exists against him. He also said the duration of a suspension in visa services would depend on talks between the two governments regarding the detention of Turkish staff at the US embassy. Bass added that the length of the suspension would also depend on the Turkish government's commitment to protecting our facilities and personnel here in Turkey, noting it was not a visa ban on Turkish citizens. Speaking at a news conference with Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić in Belgrade on Wednesday, President Erdogan blamed US Ambassador John Bass for the ongoing visa row. We have not agreed and are not agreeing to this ambassador making farewell visits with ministers, the parliament speaker and myself, Erdogan said, adding that the ongoing ambassador Bass was no longer seen as the representative of the United States in Turkey. In response to President Erdogan's accusations, U.S. Department of State's spokesperson Heather Nauert said on Tuesday that the latest decision by the U.S. to suspend visa services at diplomatic facilities in Turkey was coordinated with the State Department, White House, and National Security Council. Nauert underlined that the U.S. ambassador to Turkey had the full backing of the U.S. government. Our ambassadors tend not to do things unilaterally. We have a very close coordination and cooperation with our ambassadors, she added, saying that Ambassador John Bass had done a terrific job in Turkey. On Wednesday, state-run Anadolu News Agency reported that U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu spoke by telephone to discuss the mutual suspension of visa services without giving further details. Speaking at a meeting of provincial governors in Ankara yesterday, President Erdogan said, "We are not a tribal state. We are the state of the Republic of Turkey, and you will accept it. If you don't, then sorry, but we do not need you." The decision taken by the US consulate and the statements made after it are not related to the truth or reality. A junta within the American bureaucracy that is related to the previous administration aims to sabotage relations between the new administration and Turkey, he added. Erdogan insisted that it was Bass who prompted the current visa suspension crisis. Let me be clear. The person who caused this is the ambassador here. It is unacceptable that the US has sacrificed a strategic partner like Turkey to a presumptuous ambassador, Erdogan said. In the same speech, Erdogan also referred to the case of Iranian-Turkish businessman Reza Zarrab, who is currently facing trial in the US on charges of violating sanctions on Iran. The case also involves former Minister Zafer Çağlayan and state-run Halkbank Deputy General Manager Mehmet Hakan Atilla. On the one hand, you arrest the deputy manager of my bank, who has not committed any crime, but on the other hand, my citizen Zarrab has been in prison in the US for 2 years without crime, trying to use him as a confessor, Erdogan said in his speech.
Tonight, we're joined by Ömer Taşpınar, a Turkey expert at the Brookings Institute, to talk about US-Turkey relations. Good evening, Mr. Taşpınar. Welcome to Medyascope.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So many events have unfolded and so many new lows have been reached in the past 5-6 days in US-Turkey relations. It's almost impossible to start talking about what's been going on. As you know, less than a month ago, President Erdogan was praised as a friend by US President Donald Trump. So my first question to you is, how surprising is this new situation from the point of view of Washington, D.C. at the moment?
Well, if you were looking at Turkish-American relations strictly from the lens of Trump and Erdogan meetings at the bilateral level between the two presidents, it is quite surprising because not only President Trump has a tendency to get along well with his friend Recep Tayyip Erdogan, but more importantly, in the last meeting they had in New York, in the framework of the United Nations Security Council meetings, United Nations General Assembly meetings, Mr. Trump praised the relationship as it has never been better, and he basically said President Erdogan deserves a lot for this. So indeed, it comes as a surprise because the two presidents seem to have good chemistry. Yet good chemistry is not enough to really solve deeply rooted structural problems in Turkish-American relations. And for those of us who have been following Turkish-American relations based on reality rather than fantasy, this is not that surprising. The two countries have been going through a series of crises, and there was mounting level of criticism both in Washington and in Ankara about the foreign policy and domestic politics of the two countries. Yet it is still a little bit surprising that the United States decided to have such a large visa restriction on all citizens, non-immigrant visas. This is quite unprecedented in the way the United States deals with countries, let alone a NATO ally. So there is an element of surprise, nevertheless.
Mm-hmm. And is this, in your opinion, simply a visa crisis as currently being portrayed by the mainstream Turkish media, or is there a better way to frame it, perhaps, in your opinion?
I think there's a better way to frame it, of course. It's the culmination of a series of crises, as I tried to refer to it. I think one has to look at the three major disappointments that Turkey has with the United States and the series of disappointments that the United States has with Ankara. The three Turkish major disappointments are, of course, over the Kurdish question in Syria, the fact that the United States decided to arm the YPG in its effort to fight ISIL. This came as a huge blow to Turkish efforts to stop that. The second one is about the failure to get the extradition of Fethullah Gülen, which has been an ongoing issue for the last few years, but gained intensity since the failed coup. And the file is not going anywhere, as far as I can tell. There's still an American talking point indicating that there is no clear evidence implicating the cleric in Pennsylvania, Fethullah Gülen, to the failed coup in Turkey. And the third issue is the issue of Reza Zarrab, which creates a problem in the eyes of Ankara because it implicates directly Erdogan and his family. So on these three main files, dossiers, Washington has not been very cooperative with Ankara. Washington, on the other hand, has major issues with Ankara regarding the arrest of many journalists. More recently, the arrest of Turkish personnel working at the U.S. Embassy, U.S. Consulate in Adana and Istanbul. Turkey's purchase of S-400 missile defense system from Russia. Turkey's cooperation with Iran, growing cooperation with Iran and Russia in Syria, and overall the deterioration of Turkey's democratic standards. So there's no shortage of problems, and it was, in that sense, not that surprising that things came to a blow. But as I tried to say before, one could have expected a more targeted sanction, visa sanction from the United States, maybe targeting some officials or some members of the media in Turkey that are basically spreading lies about the United States, who are engaged more in propaganda than journalism. Yet they prefer to go for a kind of, so to speak, nuclear option, which is a blanket visa ban on all non-immigrant applications from Turkey.
As you may have followed, the NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg made a comment today on this ongoing dispute, and he said, I quote, "I urge the US and Turkey to sit down and find solutions because it's important for the alliance that we're able to work closely together, especially in that region." So how is this rift between the US and Turkey likely to affect NATO as an alliance? In other words, where does NATO stand in this picture?
I think NATO's main complaint about Turkey is not related to this recent crisis. It has been ongoing in terms of two major issues. First, the fact that most of the NATO-related personnel in Turkey have been discharged. The Turkish military has engaged in a major purge, and they have purged and discharged most of the pro-Atlanticist, pro-NATO officers. And in fact, there's a situation where Turkey no longer really has many officers at the colonel level or above who are able to speak English or who understand really the alliance. So in this attempt to purge the Gülenist members from the military, I think what happened was that you have a situation where an increasingly Eurasianist, anti-American, potentially pro-Russia, pro-China vision is on the rise in the Turkish military. This is an ongoing source of long-term concern for NATO in terms of losing some of their counterparts that they used to work with. The second issue is a more urgent one, and it relates to Turkey's decision to purchase Russian missile defense, S-400s, which will be basically not compatible with NATO systems. That is a serious concern in NATO, and I have heard recently the U.S. ambassador in NATO complain about the fact that this is the first time that they're encountering such a situation where a critically important member is basically purchasing missile defense that will not be compatible with NATO equipment, NATO systems. And to make things even more confusing, it's not even clear that Russia has officially acknowledged the sale. It is very clear that they're not acknowledging, Moscow is not acknowledging technology sharing, which was a major part of the reason why Turkey wanted to sign the deal with the Russians. But as far as I know, there's not even a clear indication from Russia that this is a done deal. So there's a considerable level of confusion within NATO about where Turkey stands and where Turkey is going.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Taşpınar, my next question to you is this. Could this dispute be a primer for more complex crises to emerge in the near future? In other words, let me ask you this. What's your prediction on the lifespan of this ongoing rift?
Well, I think we're more at a culmination. I don't expect things to get much worse than they currently are. I think we have hit a kind of bottom in Turkish-American relations. Mm-hmm. And many analysts agree that this is as worse as it gets. The 1970s, when there was an arms embargo to Turkey. So I don't expect things to deteriorate that much. My sense is that there will be talks between Turkish and American officials, first at the foreign ministry level, State Department level. They try to solve it with basically bilateral talks between bureaucrats. But I think this is more than a bureaucratic problem. So eventually it will require President Trump and President Erdogan to engage in some personal diplomacy. And that kind of personal diplomacy for at least Mr. Trump will involve certain demands from Turkey. He's likely to demand the release of American citizens in Turkey who do not have Turkish citizenship or any Turkish background. And the most important demand that he will make, in my opinion, will be the release of the U.S. pastor, U.S. priest, who has been in a Turkish jail for more than a year, and no one exactly knows why he's in jail. It's obvious that there's an element of taking him hostage in return for Fethullah Gülen. And I think President Trump, given the mounting level of interest on this issue from the New York Times, U.S. media, from Congress, and let's not forget that the Vice President Mike Pence is himself a very religious man who has a very strong evangelist constituency. He's himself involved in this. It's likely that President Trump will demand the release of Pastor Brunson, in addition to the release of the Turkish personnel working for the U.S. consulates. Of course, it remains to be seen whether President Erdogan will comply, will play ball. He may have a couple of demands on his own side, but the difference is that Trump is not in a position to deliver. He's dealing with a country where there are institutions, where there's a really independent judiciary. We have seen how Trump is unable to really deliver on many issues, whereas President Erdogan is in a position to deliver. There aren't many issues which President Erdogan cannot solve in Turkey with a phone call. He kind of controls the country and micromanages many issues, including the judiciary cases. So there's a kind of expectation in Washington that Erdogan can deliver if he really wants to, whereas Trump cannot.
You've actually already partially answered my final question to you in your previous response, as you've suggested that you don't really expect the situation to worsen. However, still, let me address this question to you. How hurtful do you think this crisis will be if it continues in the foreseeable future?
Well, I think the crisis is hurting the Turkish economy already. The Turkish lira may have recovered from its lows, but there is a lot of question marks among foreign investors to Turkey, wondering where Turkey is going. And at a time when Turkey is having problems with all its neighbors, including the only neighbor that it had good relations, the KRG, at a time when Turkey's relations with the EU are at a crisis. Now there is a major crisis with the United States, and there are no clear indications that Turkey's relations with Russia are very good. I have watched on Medyascope a very interesting interview explaining how things on the Russia-Turkey front are far from being optimistic. So this is not a country that really creates confidence among consumers and investors. So it may hit the Turkish economy hardly, and this is why I believe it's in Erdogan's interest to try to solve this problem before it gets worse. And this is why I think he's likely to compromise, because at the end of the day, for Erdogan, what really matters is the economy and survival. And his survival depends on the economy. So this is a new situation where the United States has actually learned how to hurt Turkey by hurting the Turkish economy. And I think Erdogan will realize that it is in his own interest to calm down and to compromise with the United States.
Mr. Taşpınar, thank you very much for your comments and for joining us tonight.
Thank you, my pleasure.
We'll continue with our next news video on the ongoing visa crisis between the US and Turkey.
The decision by the United States to suspend non-immigrant visa services at its diplomatic facilities in Turkey raised a question on how Turkish citizens will be affected. Historical statistics suggest that Among other groups, businessmen, tourists, and students will be the ones who suffer the most from the suspension. According to the US regulations, non-immigrant visas include all temporary visa categories, including diplomatic, tourism, business, and student visas. This implies that until further notice is made, Turkish citizens will be unable to get a temporary visa for either of these purposes. During the last 3 years, approximately 318,000 non-immigrant visas were given by the U.S. diplomatic facilities in Turkey, and approximately 320,000 non-immigrant visas were given to Turkish citizens by the global U.S. diplomatic facilities. Temporary business and tourism visa categories constitute to 75% of the total non-immigrant visas obtained by Turkish citizens. Therefore, Turkish citizens who plan to visit the U.S. on a temporary basis for personal matters, including business, health, and tourism, will not be able to obtain a visa from the U.S. diplomatic facilities in Turkey. Prospective students planning to study in the United States are also negatively affected by the suspension of the visa services. Academic and vocational visa categories constitute approximately 7% of the total non-immigrant visas obtained by Turkish citizens during the last 3 years. Therefore, students who are planning to receive academic and vocational training in the United States will be watching the developments closely. Likewise, Turkey's diplomatic facilities in US will also be affected by the decision. As diplomatic visas are categorized as a non-immigrant visa, Turkish diplomatic personnel will not be able to travel to the US. Yet, although the regular policy of the U.S. State Department is to accept visa applications only from the resident country of the applicant, Ambassador John Bass stated that this suspension of services is not a visa ban on Turkish citizens. It's a suspension of our consideration of new visa applications. If you have a valid visa, you can still travel to the United States. If you want to apply for a visa from another U.S. embassy or consulate outside of Turkey, you are free to do so. Therefore, all Turkish citizens are free to apply to a non-immigrant visa at another U.S. embassy or consulate outside of Turkey.
The Turkish military entered the Syrian province of Idlib on October 6 to start implementing de-escalation zones.
The Turkish military has entered the northern Syrian province of Idlib on October 6 to start implementing the first of the 4 de-escalation zones agreed by Turkey, Russia and Iran during the Astana peace talks. The statement by the Turkish armed forces said that the operation will attempt to create the agreed de-escalation zones as well prevent Syrian Kurdish groups from building a terror corridor along the Syrian border toward the Mediterranean Sea. On October 8, the Turkish armed forces shelled positions in jihadist-controlled Idlib in support of the advance of Free Syrian Army fighters on the ground. The Turkish military announced today that its elements began forming monitoring spots in Syria's Idlib province as part of efforts to create a de-escalation zone to end the Syrian war. In a statement issued today, the Turkish armed forces stated that the formation of monitoring spots began as of October 12 in coordination with surveillance activities launched on October 8. The first convoy of Turkish forces crossed into Syria's Idlib province yesterday. The military convoy included some 30 armored vehicles and over 100 soldiers, comprising of special and commando forces. Also, some 15 tanks were sent to the area between the old Pınar post and a wall currently being built near the border.
An Istanbul prosecutor has demanded up to 15 years in jail on terror charges for 11 human rights activists detained in Burada in July.
An Istanbul prosecutor has completed an indictment into 11 human rights activists who were detained in July during a meeting in Istanbul's Büyükada Island, demanding up to 15 years in jail on terror charges for the suspects. According to the 17-page indictment submitted to Istanbul Heavy Criminal Court, human rights advocate Taner Kılıç an executive from Amnesty International Turkey, faces 7.5 to 15 years in prison on the charge of being a member of the armed Fethullahist terrorist organization, while other rights advocates are facing from 5 to 10 years in prison on charge of aiding an armed terrorist organization. In the indictment, it has been stated that Taner Kılıç had organized the meeting in Büyükada but could not attend the meeting as he had been detained in Izmir for using aylık, an encrypted communication software used among the members of Gülen community. The indictment also claims that the suspects attempted to turn the Justice March, initiated by main opposition Republican People's Party leader Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu from Ankara to Istanbul in June, into chaos and aimed to spread turmoil to other provinces across the country. 8 of the suspects were previously arrested, including German citizen Peter Frank Stüttner, Swedish citizen Ali Kravi, and Amnesty International Turkey director İdil Eser.
Turkey's national amputee football team beat England and became the European champions on Monday.
Turkey's national amputee football team beat England 2-1 last Monday at the European Amputee Football Federation's European Championship final match to be crowned European champions at Vodafone Park in Beşiktaş district of Istanbul. Turkey led 1-0 at halftime thanks to a goal in the 25th minute by Ömer Güleryüz. I could never have even dreamed of playing in such an atmosphere, Güleryüz said. The Turkish Football Federation had decided to move the match to Vodafone Park. Although Turkey dominated the match until the final minute, Ray Westbrook managed to draw England level late in the 50th minute of the game. Turkish captain Osman Çakmak then scored 2 minutes later to give Turkey the title. Amputee football games are 50 minutes long, 2 halves of 25 minutes. The coach told me before the game that England was undefeated, but I said they haven't played us yet, said Çakmak, praising his teammates and thanking the crowd for its support. Çakmak lost his left foot after stepping on a landmine during an anti-terror operation in the southeastern district of Şırnak while performing his military service.
Now let's have a look at what's on in Istanbul this weekend.
Turkish singer Nilüfer Yanya, who has previously collaborated with the XX, will be accompanied by the British fashionable DJ Shellu tonight at Garage Istanbul. The famous Berlin Symphony Orchestra will play in the Ayayirini Church at the Topkapı Museum tomorrow. Rock Days Istanbul kicks off tomorrow. Life Park Concert Hall in the northern forest of Istanbul is hosting a 2-day rock festival with local big names such as Teoman, Manga, Duman, Bülent Ortaçgil, and many others. Future Tellers is on at Digilog Space Zorlu PSM. The exhibition, which consists of thought works by 12 participants, strays over a range of media from drawing, sculpture, code, text to film and mixed media installation. Implications and inventions of new technologies are often derived from science fiction works, which reminds us of the relevance of shared beliefs and focused intention in the matter of constructing features.
That's all from This Week in Turkey. Thanks for tuning in and hope to see you again next Friday at 9 p.m. Goodbye.